Hey there, sleepy adventurers. Welcome back to another cozy episode of our Bedtime History Tales. Laugh before we dive into the fascinating story that's pretty sure to lull you into dreamland. I'd be over the moon if you could hit that like button and consider subscribing. Only if you're really enjoying the content, of course. It helps the channel grow and ensures more relaxing stories find their way to your bedtime routine. Now, I have a little request for you. I love feeling connected to all of you scattered across the globe. So if you wouldn't mind, drop a comment telling me the name of your city and what time it is where you are. I'll be reading through them later, imagining all of us wrapped up in our blankets, laugh just sharing this peaceful moment, even though we're just miles apart. All right, it's time to set the mood, dim those lights, turn on that trusty little fan for some soothing background noise, and get really comfortable. So tonight, we're journeying to the heart of the Sahara Desert to uncover the extraordinary life of Lath, a Fulani Kingdom chieftain. His story is filled with wild adventures, unexpected twists, and a healthy dose of humor, just like Laugh unperfect for drifting off to, so snuggle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Picture this Laugh, a baby wrapped in goat skin, blankets nestled under the scorching Saharan sun. This isn't just any infant, just the future ruler of the Fulani Kingdom, born into a world where sandy dunes are both playground and battlefield. The year is lost to time, but the legend of this desert-dwelling chieftain begins right here in a nomadic camp where survival depends on knowing every grain of sand and every star in the sky. The Fulani people, known for their resilience and nomadic lifestyle, were no strangers to hardship, but for this little one, hardship would become like a stepping stone to greatness. His mother, a fierce and wise woman, taught him the ways of the desert from an early age. Daily, the desert is a cruel mistress, so daily, she would say, "Thou, not, if you learn to read her signs, she will provide." So as a toddler, he learned to distinguish the tracks of a thirsty gazelle from those of a dangerous snake, to find hidden oases by the angle of the setting sun, and to survive on the mega resources like the desert grudgingly offered. His father, the current chieftain, was a man of few words, but great deeds. He led the tribe through countless migrations, always in search of greener pastures and always fresh water. Laugh, the young boy, watched in awe as his father negotiated with other tribes, settled disputes, and made decisions that would determine the fate of their people. So these early lessons in leadership and survival would shape the boy's character and prepare him for the challenges that just lay ahead. As he grew older, his curiosity and intelligence set him apart. So while other children played with makeshift toys, he studied the patterns of the wind, the behavior of the herds, and the politics of the neighboring tribes. So he asked questions that no one else had ever thought to ask, and his insights often left the elders scratching their heads in amazement. But life in the desert is never easy. A sudden sandstorm could wipe out an entire camp, so a drought could decimate the herds, and rival tribes were always a threat. One fateful day, when the boy was just 10 years old, a rival tribe attacked their camp, hoping to steal their precious water supply. In the chaos that ensued, the boy showed remarkable courage and quick thinking. He just rallied a group of young warriors, using his knowledge of the terrain to set up an ambush and drive the attackers just away. This act of bravery did not go unnoticed. Laugh, his father, proud but also worried about his son's safety, knew that this was just the beginning. The young boy had proven himself, but he still had so much to learn. And so the training began in earnest, like Laugh, untucked training that would turn like a curious child into like a legendary chieftain, a leader who'll go down in history as one of the most remarkable figures of the Fulani Kingdom. In the Fulani Kingdom, cows aren't just livestock like Unka, they're currency status symbols and the lifeblood of society. As our young chieftain in training hit his teenage years, he found himself thrust into the most cutthroat tardrum twice you can imagine. Laugh. So the tribal cattle pens, this was where real power was wielded, and the game was all about who could manage, expand, and protect the herd. Back then, each family within the tribe had its own mini herd, but coordinating grazing, breeding, and trade was a nightmare. The elders, just stuck in their ways, relied on archaic systems that often led to just overgrazing and dispute. Enter our hero, armed with a brain full of radical ideas. Laugh. He proposed our centralized cattle management system, which was basically the ancient equivalent of a corporate merger, sort of like Unco without the lawyers and fancy contract. Of course, convincing the tribe wasn't just a walk in the desert. The older folks were skeptical, and change what's worked for generations. Didn't laugh. They grumbled, but our teen prodigy had a plan. He just started small, offering to manage the herds of a few reluctant families on a trial basis, using his knowledge of seasonal grazing patterns and some surprisingly advanced breeding strategies. He'd noticed that crossbreeding certain cows produced stronger, more resilient laugh offspring. He just quickly increased the size and health of those herds. Word spread like wildfire through the tribe. Soon more and more families were lining up to hand over their cattle to this young whiz. But so success brought new challenges. Jealous rivals, both within and outside the tribe, began to eye the growing herd with envy. There were rumors of sabotage, of poisoned water sources, and of attempts to steal like the best breeding stock. Our chieftain had to become part cattle whisperer, laugh, part detective. He set up a system of guards and informants, using the loyalty he'd earned from the families whose herds he'd always improved. When one particularly brazen rival tribe tried to rustle 100 of his prime cows, he didn't just retaliate, laugh. So Unki outsmarted them. He led a small, elite group of warriors on a 3-day-long pursuit, using the desert's terrain to his advantage. When they finally caught up with the thieves, instead of a bloody battle, he offered them a deal, laugh. So join his tribe and get a share of the herd's profits, or just face the consequences. Most of the rustlers, really impressed by his audacity and generosity, chose to join, and just like that, the young chieftain had not only protected his herd, but also expanded his influence. His power play in the world of cattle had just made him a major player in the tribe, setting the stage for even greater things to come. As our young Fulani chieftain's reputation grew, so did his ambition to expand trade beyond the tribe's traditional circles. One fateful day, a caravan of camel-riding Arab merchants rolled into the camp, their eyes glinting with promises of wealth and exotic goods. Laugh, it was the chieftain's first big shot at international business, and boy, so was he in for a rude awakening. The merchants, seasoned players in the desert trade game, presented like a dazzling array of wares, shimmering silk from distant lands, fragrant spices that could transform the blandest of Fulani dishes, and shiny trinkets that seemed to just hold the secrets of the world. In return, they really wanted cattle, lots of them. The chieftain, eager to prove himself on the big stage, jumped at the offer without a second thought. Big mistake. The negotiations were a masterclass in deception. So the merchant, speaking in flowery language and using complex bartering tactics, managed to convince the chieftain that his prime cattle were worth so far less than they actually were. They used every trick in the book, just from false flattery to exaggerating the risks of transporting the goods, to drive down the price. And our poor, inexperienced chieftain, blinded by the allure of new opportunities, fell right into their whole trap. When the deal was sealed and the camels loaded with the tribe's best cows, the chieftain realized something was off. Laugh. The goods he'd received were of lower quality than promised. Like the silk was just threadbare, the spices were mostly filler, and the trinkets were cheap imitations. But By then, the merchants were long gone, disappearing into the vast expanse of the desert. The tribe was furious, like the elders who had initially been skeptical of the deal, now turned on the chieftain, blaming him for the loss of their precious livestock. But instead of wallowing in self-pity, our resilient hero decided to turn this disaster into a lesson. He spent weeks studying the art of trade, learning the true value of different goods and deciphering the tricks used by unscrupulous merchants. So he even sent spies to track down the rogue caravan, not for revenge, but to understand their modus operandi better. And when another trading opportunity presented itself, this time he was always ready. He negotiated like a seasoned pro, demanding guarantees, inspecting the goods thoroughly, and using his newfound knowledge to drive a hard bargain. That first disastrous deal may have just been a setback, but it was also the making of a shrewd and savvy trader, a skill that would serve him well in his quest to build like a powerful kingdom. With his influence in the tribe so steadily growing, it was only a matter of time before the young chieftain's thoughts turned to matters of the heart and politics. A neighboring tribe, known for its strategic location near a major oasis, had a beautiful princess of marriageable age. A union between the two would not only satisfy the chieftain's romantic inclinations, but also strengthen his tribe's position in the desert power game. But first he had to actually navigate the treacherous waters of Fulani courtship and actually, most importantly, the negotiation of the bride price. In Fulani tradition, the bride price was no small matter. It was a whole display of wealth, power, and respect for the bride's family. Most suitors would offer a combination of gold, jewels, and fine fabric, but our chieftain never won to do things like the ordinary way, decided to go big or go home. So he announced that he would offer 300 of his finest spotted cows as the bride price. The decision sent shockwaves through both tribes. On one hand, the sheer number of cattle was a testament to his wealth and success as a herd manager. On the other hand, spotted cows were pretty rare and highly prized, not just for their meat and milk, but also for their symbolic value in Fulani. Some in the chieftain's own tribe thought he was crazy. Giving away so many valuable animals could weaken their economic standing. And in the princess's tribe, there were those who scoffed at the idea of just a bride price that wasn't just made of precious metals or gemstones. But the chieftain was undeterred. He argued that the spotted cows represented something far more valuable than gold, so they were a living, breathing source of wealth and sustenance. They could reproduce, provide milk and leather, and be used for trade. So in a way, he was offering the princess's family a future, not just a one-time payment. The negotiations were so tense. The bride's father, a tough and shrewd leader himself, tried to drive a hard bargain, asking for additional gifts and guarantee. But the chieftain held his ground, using his charm and negotiating skills to convince the old man of the value of his offer. In the end, after days of back and so forth, the bride's family accepted the 300 spotted cows as the bride price. The wedding was a grand affair, attended by tribes from far and wide, and as the chieftain and his new bride rode off into the sunset on a pair of beautifully adorned camels, everyone knew that this union was more than just a marriage, so it was a statement of intent, a sign that the young chieftain was just ready to take his place among the great leaders of the desert. With his newfound marital alliance and growing influence, the young chieftain soon faced a new challenge. So neighboring tribes were eyeing his expanding territory with envy. In a world where water and grazing land were just as precious as gold, it was only a matter of time before tensions boiled over into conflict. And so beneath the humble thatched roof of a simple thatched hut, the chieftain gathered his most trusted advisors for what would become one of the most crucial military meetings in the whole history of the Fulani Kingdom. The core war room Guinea, a far cry from the opulent command centers of later civilizations. There were no polished maps on marble tables or rows of uniformed officers. Instead, the chieftains spread out a rough sort of hewn sheepskin map on the dirt floor, using small stones to mark the positions of his own forces, as well as those of the potential aggressor. His advisors, like a motley crew of seasoned warriors, wise elders, and sharp-tongued strategists, sat cross-legged around him, ready to offer their insight. So the first order of business was to assess the threat. So one of the elders, his face lined with the scars of countless battles, pointed to a cluster of stones representing a particularly aggressive tribe. Ago, they've been encroaching on our grazing lands for months. Twice, he growled. Guy laugh. If we don't stop them, we'll soon be left with nothing but sand and dust. Even another advisor, a young and ambitious warrior, argued for a preemptive strike. Daily, we should catch them off guard while they're still complacent. Solisi said, his eyes just flashing with excitement. But the chieftain wasn't so quick to rush into battle. He knew that war could devastate both sides, leaving his people vulnerable to other threats. So instead, he proposed a more cunning plan. Using the detailed knowledge of the terrain that he'd gained from his years as a nomad, he suggested setting up a series of ambushes along the enemy's likely routes of advance. Daily will make them think they're walking into an easy victory. Ling laughed. He explained, a mischievous glint in his eye area, and then just hit them exactly where it hurts. The advisors debated the plan for hours, raising objections and offering suggestions for improvement. Some worried that the enemy might see through the ruse, while others were concerned about the logistics of coordinating multiple ambushes, but the chieftain patiently addressed each concern using his charisma and strategic thinking to win over even his most skeptical advisors. As the sun began to set outside the thatched hut, so the plan was finally finalized, the chieftain stood up, brushing the dirt off his robes, and looked at his advisors with determination. Game Island, you laugh. We teach these interlopers a lesson they won't soon forget. Dream, he said. Little did anyone know that this meeting in a humble, thatched hut would be the first step in a series of military victories that would solidify the chieftain's position as one of the most feared and respected leaders in the whole desert. With the threat of conflict looming large, our Fulani chieftain decided to try one last card before resorting to all-out war, sort of negotiation, but this wasn't going to be your average peace talk. Oh no, our guy had a strategy so there it just might work, laugh. So he decided to use the element of surprise by sending his enemies Attis gift, when that would throw them completely off balance. The target a rival tribe that had been pretty steadily encroaching on his territory. Instead of showing up with a team of armed guards or a list of demands, the chieftain arrived at their camp with a caravan of the fattest, laziest camels, like you've ever seen. Now in the desert, camels are usually prized for their speed and endurance, so anyway, you can imagine the confusion on the faces of the rival chieftain and his advisors when they saw these sluggish beasts just waddling into their camp. These are just a token of our goodwill, Dan the Fulani chieftain announced with a straight face as if he wasn't secretly plotting something. The rival tribe was immediately on edge. So what was the catch? Why would he give away valuable, albeit rather rotund, livestock without asking for anything in return? While the rival tribe was just busy scratching their heads, our chieftain started the real game. He casually mentioned how these camels were from a special breeding line, one that could produce offspring with incredible strength, sort of like uncut, if only they had the right grazing land and wouldn't, the disputed territory just happened to have the perfect pastures for these pampered camels. The rival chieftain, now thoroughly confused but also intrigued, found himself drawn into a conversation about the benefits of cooperation. So our chieftain painted a picture of a future where both tribes could share the land, trade resources, and grow stronger together. All the while, those plump camels just stood there, munching on whatever they could find. and looking completely oblivious to the high-stakes negotiation happening around them. Laugh by the end of the meeting, the rival tribe wasn't just considering peace, sort of like uncut. They were actually excited about the possibilities of an alliance. They agreed to pull back from the disputed territory and even offered some of their own resources as a sign of good faith. It was just a masterclass in negotiation. Laugh sort of uncut, using a seemingly ridiculous gift to disarm the enemy, catch them off guard, and turn a potential conflict into a mutually beneficial partnership. And as the chieftain rode back to his camp, he just couldn't help but smirk, knowing that he just pulled off one of the most unexpected and successful diplomatic coups in desert history. As the Fulani Kingdom continued to grow, our chieftain faced a new dilemma. So the current settlement was becoming overcrowded and resources were stretched thin. Seeking guidance, he turned to the tribe's shaman, a figure revered for their supposed ability to communicate with the spirits. Big mistake, the shaman, with a serious case soul, I know, like Besta syndrome, declared that the spirits demanded a grand shandu to a mysterious location so deep in the desert. The shaman waved around a bunch of chicken bones, mumbled some incantations, and pointed to a spot on the map that looked like, to the untrained eye, like a desolate wasteland. But in the shaman's words, it was a hidden paradise, daily laugh, like a place where the tribe would thrive under the blessings of the ancestors. The chieftain Ever, the believer in the wisdom of the spiritual realm, bought into the idea hook, line, and sinker. The move of the capital was an absolute nightmare from the start. Gathering the entire tribe, their livestock, and all their belongings was no small feat. Camels groaned under the weight of heavy tents, so children cried as they were torn from their familiar surroundings, and the elderly struggled to keep up with the arduous journey. And all the while the chieftain tried to keep morale really high, repeating the shaman's promises of a better future. But when they finally reached the so-called paradise, it was like a scene straight out of a desert horror movie. There was no hidden oasis, no fertile soil, just endless sand dunes and a blazing sun. The few scraggly bushes that dotted the landscape offered no shade, and the water they'd brought with them was running dangerously low. The tribe was always on the verge of a full-blown panic. The chieftain, realizing he'd been royally hoodwinked, confronted the whole shaman. But the whole shaman, Ever, the master of deflection, claims that the tribe's lack of faith had angered the spirit. It was a classic case of Wackiest. It's not my fault, it's yours, daily with no other choice. So the chieftain had to lead the exhausted tribe back to their old settlement, licking their wounds and nursing their bruised pride. This debacle was a really harsh lesson for the chieftain. From then on, he learned to balance spiritual guidance with practical common sense. And as for the shaman, let's just say their influence in the tribe took a major hit. But hey, at least the whole fiasco made for one heck of a cautionary tale in Fulani history. In a time when slavery was as common as sand in the desert, our Fulani chieftain decided to shake things up with a policy that would make even modern HR managers raise an eyebrow. Slave pensions. Now, before you start picturing ancient retirement homes in the Sahara, let's just dive into how this whole mind-boggling idea came to be. Like most tribes, the Fulani had a whole system of slavery. Captives from battles or debtors who couldn't pay their dues were put to work like herding cattle, building shelters, and performing other essential tasks. But unlike his contemporaries, the chieftain noticed a problem. As slaves aged, they became less productive, and many were simply cast aside when they could no longer pull their weight. It was a cruel cycle. And so he decided to just break it. His solution. So promise every slave that if they serve the tribe loyally for 20 years, they'd receive a retirement package full of tenting of 2 cows in a society where cattle were currency. This was no small deal. The news spread like wildfire through the slave quarters. Suddenly, there was hope on the horizon, like a light at the end of the long sandy tunnel of servitude. Of course, not everyone was on board with the idea. The elders were furious daily, like, why waste good cattle on those who have nothing to offer? Daily, they raged laugh, but the chieftain had a plan. He argued that by offering this incentive, slaves would work harder and be more loyal. After all, who probably wouldn't want to earn their own slice of the herd? And you know what? It worked like a charm. Laugh. So slaves who had once dragged their feet now worked with newfound enthusiasm. They took better care of the tribe's resources because they knew their future depended on it. As the first group of slaves reached their whole 20-year milestone, the chieftain made a pretty big show of presenting them with their cows. It was a spectacle that not only rewarded the elderly slaves, but also sent a powerful message to the rest of the tribe. This radical policy didn't just improve the lives of the slaves, it also had a profound impact on the tribe as a whole. Laugh morale soared, and the sense of community actually grew stronger. The chieftain had managed to turn a system of oppression into something that benefited everyone. And while the idea of box slave pensions might seem strange to us today, in the context of the Fulani Kingdom, it was just a stroke of genius that just set the tribe apart from its neighbors. When it came to diplomacy, most leaders relied on gold, jewels, or promises of military support. But our Fulani chieftain had a different strategy up his sleeve. Laugh, sort of like one that involved everyone's favorite desert by product cow dung. Yes, you read that right. In a move that would baffle diplomats around the world, he decided to turn dried cow manure into a powerful diplomatic tool. It all started when tensions flared with the neighboring tribe over a prime grazing area. Instead of marching in with an army or just sending envoys with demands, the chieftain gathered his people and just set to work. They spent days collecting, drying, and shaping the cow dung into large, flat discs. Laugh, it was like a strange, stinky art project, but no one really dared question the chieftain's plan. Once the Jewish gift guides always ready, he loaded them onto a caravan of camels and headed straight for the rival tribe's camp. When they arrived, the sight of a procession of camels carrying stacks of dried cow dung was enough to make the rival chieftain and his advisors do a double take. Daily, what is the meaning of this line? They demanded, half amused, half laughed, just offended. The Fulani chieftain, with a straight face, explained that these were no ordinary cow patties. So in Fulani culture, cow dung was a symbol of abundance and prosperity. A well-stocked pile of dried cow dung meant a thriving herd, and by sharing these gifts, he was offering a sign of his goodwill and a proposal for cooperation. So he then went on to suggest that they share the disputed grazing land, using the cow dung as a metaphor for how working together could actually lead to mutual growth. It was a pitch so bizarre that it actually worked. Laugh. The rival tribe, initially skeptical, couldn't help but be intrigued by the chieftain's audacity. They actually saw the humor in the situation, and actually, more importantly, the wisdom behind his proposal instead of a bitter feud. Laugh. The two tribes sat down to negotiate. So with the stacks of cow dung serving as a constant reminder of the chieftain's unconventional approach to diplomacy. In the end, the rival tribe actually agreed to the chieftain's terms, and a new alliance was formed. Word of this ex-cow dung. Laugh. So long, making the Fulani chieftain a legend in the desert. Who would have thought that something as humble as dried cow manure could be turned into a powerful tool for peace and cooperation? Our Fulani chieftain, always one for a strategic power move, decided to host a friendly daily gathering for a particularly troublesome neighboring tribe, left just like Unka, a classic case of a hangman banquet desert style. The plan was simple. Wine and dine the rival leaders, butter them up with flattery, and then subtly slip in some non-negotiable demands for peace. But, as with most well-laid plans, things didn't exactly go as expected, all thanks to a jar of laugh. Oh honey. The feast was set up in a grand tent, decorated with the finest goatskins and lit by dozens of oil lamps. The centerpiece was a massive roasted camel, marinated in a secret blend of spices and oh, honey. The chieftain, playing the perfect host, welcomed the rival tribe with open arms, his smile as sweet as the honey-glazed meat that awaited them. As the guests kind of settled in and started to dig into the meal, the chieftain began his charm offensive, complimented the rival chieftain's leadership skills, talked about the benefits of unity, and casually mentioned a few periodical adjustments to the border. Laugh that would surely benefit both tribes. But just as he was getting to the heart of his proposal, chaos just erupted. The honey, which had been so generously slathered over the camel meat, had attracted a swarm of bees. At first, it was just a few buzzing around the table, but within seconds, the tent was filled with a cloud of angry insects. Guests were jumping up, swatting at the bees, knocking over plates and cups in the process. The chieftain, caught off guard, tried to maintain his composure, but it was absolutely no use. The whole once elegant feast had turned into a madhouse. In the midst of the chaos, the rival chieftain and his advisors made a hasty retreat, their faces red from embarrassment and a few bee stings. The chieftain, left alone in the now deserted tent, could only stare at the remnants of the feast and sigh. So his carefully crafted plan had always been foiled by a simple jar of honey. But in true chieftain fashion, he didn't let this setback get him down. Instead, he used the incident as a lesson. He realized that, sometimes even the most meticulously planned strategies could be derailed by the most unexpected thing. And who knows, maybe the story of the Necrest laugh. So anyway, ruined Hongman banquet became a cautionary tale in the desert, a reminder that when it comes to diplomacy, it's best to keep the sweet stuff away from the table. In the unforgiving expanse of the Sahara, where searing sand could turn bare feet into blistered nightmares, our Fulani chieftain stumbled upon an idea that would revolutionize desert travel, like the humble sandal. It all began when he noticed his warriors constantly wincing in pain after long marches, their feet raw and battered from the scorching terrain. So determined to find a solution, he set his mind to creating a footwear that could withstand the so harsh desert conditions. So the chieftain started with the most readily available material in the tribe, like uncut sheepskin. He experimented with different cuts and stitches, trying to find the perfect design that would provide both protection and comfort. His first few attempts were less than successful. Some sandals were too tight, cutting into the warrior's ankles, while others were so loose they just kept falling off mid-stride. But he just refused to give up. After countless trials and errors, he finally hit upon a winning formula. He fashioned a really simple yet sturdy design, using strips of cured sheepskin to form a sole and straps that could be tightened around the whole foot. To test his creation, he volunteered to wear the first pair on a grueling 3-day scouting mission across the desert, and just lo and behold, his feet emerged unscathed at the end of the whole journey. Word of the revolutionary sandals spread like wildfire through the tribe and beyond. Soon, warriors, traders, and nomads from neighboring tribes were flocking to the Fulani camp, just eager to get their hands on a pair. Sensing an opportunity, the chieftain decided to monopolize the sandal market. He established a small workshop, training his people in the art of sandal making, and set pretty strict rules to ensure the whole quality of each pair. He even went a step further, creating Ethos brand guide of sorts. Each sandal was marked with a distinctive Fulani symbol, like a sign of authenticity and superior craftsmanship. As demand skyrocketed, the chieftain's tribe began to amass wealth and influence, All thanks to a simple pair of sheepskin sandals. What started as a solution to a sort of practical problem had turned into a lucrative business venture, giving the Fulani Kingdom a pretty significant edge in the desert economy. As the Fulani Kingdom's wealth grew, laugh. So Unka, thanks to everything from cattle to sandal sales, sort of like Unkar chieftain faced a whole new headache, managing the tribe's finances. The old system of scratching numbers in the dirt or trusting random dudes with bags of shells was a disaster waiting to happen. So in a move that would make modern feminists cheer, he did the unthinkable. So he put his wives in charge of the treasury. Now, before you picture a bunch of queens bickering over budget spreadsheets, let's set the scene. Laugh. So the chieftain had multiple wives, as was the custom, each with their own unique skill. One was a whiz at math. Another had a memory like an elephant, and a third was famously frugal. He gathered them in his tent and made an announcement that probably left them blinking in confusion. Laugh such, ladies, you're now the financial council of the Fulani Empire. First order of business, just replacing the shell-based currency with a more organized system. The wives introduced standardized coins, gong made from polished stones, each worth a set number of cattle. They set up a literal klux counting house in the harem, where they basically tracked every trade, tax, and expense with meticulous detail, using carved wooden tablets and colored beads. Laugh. So they created what was basically the ancient Sahara's version of an Excel spreadsheet. But the real magic was in their financial policies. The frugal wife implemented strict budget controls, banning unnecessary spending on things like the fancy camel like saddle sin and full gold like plated water jug. So, like just connecting, Wiz's wife developed a complex tax system based on herd size and trade profits, ensuring everyone paid their fair share, and the memory queen kept a mental ledger of every debt and favor, which came in handy during tricky negotiation. The results were so astounding. Within a year, the tribe's debt vanished, savings piled up, and they even had enough surplus to build a massive water storage system. Laugh. Neighboring tribes, who'd previously mocked the idea of kank women handling money daily, were now sending emissaries to learn from the Fulani's financial wisdom. The chieftain, meanwhile, took all the credit. Typical, but everyone knew who was really keeping the kingdom's purse strings tight, and so the Fulani became the first, and maybe only, desert tribe where the phrase says, the whole wife is seen. Laugh. She handles the whole money area. Wasn't a joke, but a statement of cold, hard financial fact. So when the time came for the chieftain to officially ascend to the throne of the Fulani Kingdom, he planned a coronation so grand that even the desert winds seemed to whisper in anticipation. Laugh. The ceremony was set to take place at a sacred rock formation where generations of leaders had been sworn in. Like a massive crowd gathered like uncool warriors in polished leather, elders in flowing robes, and even neighboring chiefs who traveled for days to witness the event. Laugh. The centerpiece was a golden crown crafted from melted down trade coins and inlaid with colorful desert stones, just resting on a velvet cushion at the chieftain's feet. As the tribe's spiritual leader began the incantation, the chieftain knelt to receive the crown. Laugh. But just before the elder could place it on his head, a blur of fur and screeches erupted from the nearby cliff. A troop of mischievous baboons, attracted by the commotion, had sneaked into the crowd. One bold male monkey darted forward, snatched the crown right off the cushion, and just scampered up the rock face faster than a desert-like fox. Panic just ensued. Warriors drew their spears, elders shouted curses, and the crowd surged forward in a vain attempt to intercept the thief. Chieftain, still kneeling in his ceremonial robes, could only watch in stunned silence as his crown disappeared into the baboons' rocky den. Laugh. The spiritual leader, just flustered, tried to continue the ceremony without the crown, but everyone's eyes were fixed on the cliffs. Hours passed as the tribe debated whether to storm the whole den or call off the whole ceremony. Just when all hope seemed lost, the lead baboons emerged from its lair, carrying the crown in its teeth. To everyone's shock, it didn't hurl the crown into the abyss or chew on the jewels. Instead, it just descended partway down the rock and placed the crown gently on a ledge as if just offering it back. Laugh. The chieftain, seizing the moment, climbed the rocks himself, retrieved the crown, and returned to the ceremony. As he placed the slightly scratched but still gleaming like crown on his head, the crowd just erupted in cheer. The elders declared the incident a sign from the spirit's laugh. So Unka the chieftain's rule would be tested, but ultimately blessed, and that even the wild creatures of the desert acknowledged his authority. So from that day on, the baboons became a sacred animal in the Fulani Kingdom, and the coronation of the stolen crown hold just went down in history as both a comedy of errors and a legendary omen. Laugh as the Fulani Kingdom flourished. The chieftain decided it was time for a proper seat of power, sort of like Unka, something more impressive than a patched-up goatskin tent. But building in the desert posed a problem. Stone was scarce and wood was almost non-existent. So in true chieftain fashion, he turned to the most abundant resource at hand, cow dung. Yes, so those dried patties that had already served as currency gifts and even diplomatic tools were just about to become architectural marvel. The plan was to create Allen Palace. So as basically not mixing dried cow dung with straw and water, forming it into bricks and stacking them like giant Lego blocks, the elders nearly had a collective heart attack. Unless you want to build a royal residence out of cow poop, running laugh, they sputtered. Again, the neighboring tribes will laugh us into the next sandstorm. But the chieftain was just undeterred. He'd noticed that cow dung bricks, when properly cured, were surprisingly durable, sort of like unresistant to both the desert's searing sun and the rare but torrential rain. He ordered a team of workers to start production. The process was aromatic, to say the least. Women just kneaded the dung straw mixture with their feet. Wearing special sandals, of course, men shaped it into rectangular blocks, and children helped lay them out to dry in the sun. Within weeks, a small army of dung bricks was curing in neat rows, their earthy smell blending with the desert breeze. When construction began, the chieftain oversaw every detail. He insisted on a design that included actual windows cut from thin sheets of polished bone, just a raised foundation to keep out snakes, and even just a rudimentary drainage system for the rainy season. The real showstopper, though, was the height. While most Fulani structures were single-story, the chieftain's skyscraper rose like 3 whole floors. Making it the tallest building for miles around. Critics mocked the project until they saw the finished product. The dried cow dung bricks, once smoothed and whitewashed with a mixture of clay and sand, actually just looked really, really impressive. The palace stood proudly against the desert horizon, its unique construction a testament to the chieftain's resourcefulness. Inside, the dung walls kept the rooms surprisingly cool, and the smell sort of uncool. Well, it was no worse than a stable, and far better than the alternative of baking in a stone house. Neighboring tribes initially snickered, but when they saw how well the dung palace withstood a particularly fierce sandstorm that destroyed several stone buildings, their laughter turned to self-respect. The chieftain had once again turned a liability into an asset. Proving that in the desert, innovation often comes from the most unlikely places, sort of Unka, even the bottom of a cat. As the chieftain approached the end of his long and wildly unconventional life, so he gathered his tribe for one final act of desert theatrics, the reading of his will. By this point, he'd already built a kingdom out of cow dung, made sandals like a symbol of power, and turned his wives into financial overlords. uncut, so no one should have been surprised that his last wishes were unique, to say the whole leaf. The ceremony took place in his beloved dung palace, with the smell of aged manure blending oddly with the incense burned by the spiritual leaders. The chieftain, frail but still sharp-eyed, lay on a bed of camel furs as his eldest wife unfolded a scroll made from cured goatskin. The crowd leaned in, so eager to hear what kind of bizarre legacy he'd leave behind. How, laugh, Akono, she began, her voice echoing through the hall. Development the chieftain commands that his body be mummified, not just like in the fancy Egyptian way, but wrapped in the hides of his 3 favorite spotted cats. Core gasps rippled through the crowd. Mummification was rare in the desert, and using cow hides was unheard of. But the chieftain had always been so fond of his cattle, even in death. Core laugh. So second, Guy, she continued, Guy, his tomb shall be a deep pit dug beneath the spot where he first met his primary wife, like Unka, yes, the one who now runs the treasury. Inside, he wishes to be buried with his golden crown, the one stolen by baboons, a pair of his iconic sheepskin sandals, and like a basket of dried cow dung cakes to ensure he has currency in the afterlife. When laugh, people exchanged confused glances, like, Unka, was he serious? The chieftain cracked a grin from his deathbed. Core wish is the strangest daily, the wife announced, pausing for dramatic effect. Daily he demands that his favorite spotted cows, a bull named Thunderhoof, who once kicked a rival chieftain in the shin, be mummified alongside him. So laugh, I conquered deserts with that cow. As he says, oh, and I ain't spending eternity without my wingman. The elders were aghast, mummifying like a cow, combining human and animal remains in a tomb. It went against all traditions. But the chieftain, with his last bit of strength, raised a shaky finger. Wait it, you laugh, he croaked, phone or I'll haunt you all, as a ghost cow. When that threat, oddly enough, so convinced them. And so when the chieftain passed, the tribe followed his wishes to the letter. His body and Thunderhoof were carefully wrapped in cow hides, placed in a dung brick tomb with his sandals crowned, and a literal pile of poo coins. Laugh, so over the years the tomb became a strange pilgrimage site, sort of like untravelers would stop to marvel at the audacity of a leader who took his eccentricity to the grave. But maybe there was method in his madness. In a land where everything from sand to cattle was a tool for survival, the chieftain's final act was just a reminder that even in death, one should stay true to their roots. Laugh, so uneven, if those roots were a little smelly. As the moon rises over the Sahara, casting long shadows on the chieftain's dung brick palace, laugh, so it's easy to imagine the old leader chuckling from beyond the grave. So his life was a patchwork of absurd choices, laugh, like uncrating with camel dung, trusting wives with the treasury, even letting monkeys steal his crown uncaught, but each folly wove into a legacy of resilience. The Fulani Kingdom may have faded into the sands of time, laugh, but his story lives on as a reminder that greatness doesn't always wear a golden crown. Sometimes, so it's just like a guy in sandals figuring out how to turn cow poop into a dynasty. So as you drift off, think of that desert chieftain, a man who proved that in life, and maybe even in death, maybe a little humor. And so a lot of audacity can take you further than any